and I am going to record this, and we will put this recording on a website in the next couple of days. It may not get up there this afternoon, but it will certainly be up there on Monday, Monday for sure. So, Laura, I don't remember if I gave you the URL for where we're going to put this, but I will put it in the I'll put it in the question and answer section so I can communicate to everybody, or the chat section or something like that, so people can see where to go get not only the recording of this, but also the presentations in PDF form. So anyway, the first speaker is going to be Laura Edwards, who's a state climatologist for South Dakota, mainly talking about the current issues in terms of the climate and the outlook. And then our second speaker will be Ryan Bulow from North Dakota State University Extension. And then we'll take some questions, any questions you might have. In fact, if you want to ask questions right now, you can go ahead and type them in the question area, and we can get to those at the end. Finally, I'll say we do have a few folks, or at least one person from the Climate Prediction Center, which is part of the National Weather Service, on here as well, if there are any questions we might have for them. So anyway, thank you, Laura, and go ahead and get started, I guess.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Doug, for the introduction. As Doug said, I'm the state climatologist for South Dakota, based out of Aberdeen in the northeast part of the state. And a couple of pictures here on the front slide, not really drought pictures, but the one on the left there is actually some corn that experienced some frost and freeze damage back on June 25th up in the north central part of the state around Gettysburg. So that's another issue that we are dealing with in the drought-stricken region. There on the bottom right image there is some corn that experienced some hail damage just 2 days ago south of Aberdeen, about 20 miles near Millette, South Dakota. So again, drought's not the only issue that we're stressed with this season, but also weather issues as we get through this summer. But mostly I will speak on drought, and here's the U.S. Drought Monitor map as of yesterday morning, and some expansion there in the D3, that red area, extreme drought, especially in North Dakota, bordering on South Dakota. And I'll show you some statistics here for the Northern Plains region. This is the 6-state region that is in the USDA Climate Hub region. Expansion of that D3 area by about 2.5 percentage points, just about. Total drought area in the 6-state region is just under 30% this week. Looking at D1 or worse as the drought area. Certainly conditions are really severe out there, and just to kind of give you some perspective, the D3 represents roughly a 1 in 30-year drought. When you get up to D4, that's about a 1 in 50 to 100-year drought. So certainly the impacts are really there, and the climate data are supporting at least a 1 in 30-year drought in much of the Dakotas and eastern Montana. And that's the area we're going to focus here most on for this webinar here today. To tie this in with a couple other things that are going on, as of, I believe, 2012 drought, the U.S. Drought Monitor can now kind of trigger a secretarial drought designation. So if there's D3 touching any county for 1 week or more, that is what they call a fast track to a secretarial drought designation. So there are some implications for Farm Service Agency, especially in some of their programs that open up, one of them also being the livestock forage program. So the Drought Monitor is tied to a couple of these other programs with USDA, but there you see in red in the Northern Plains region, several counties in red that are the primary secretarial drought designation counties. And then the orange colors are the contiguous counties, or any county touching one of the red ones. And this is actually from last week's map. They haven't updated yet from yesterday, but that would include those counties there between North and South Dakota, Corson, Perkins on the South Dakota side, for example. So getting to some of the climate information, here's precipitation in inches that we've seen in the last 2 weeks, and this is just since the last webinar where we updated kind of conditions to that point. So since 2 weeks ago on June 23rd, really haven't seen much precipitation in the area. I don't think that's a big surprise to many of us. But looking at those red colors, less than an inch of rain. Those darker reds, less than a half an inch for the whole 2-week period. So that's really, really tough in June or for late June, early July. And the next map I'll show you here, this is percent of average rainfall for that same period for the last 2 weeks, last 14 days. And anything in red there, 50, you can see on the scale, red is 50% of average. When you get to the darker red or maroon, even less, 25% or less of average for the last 2 weeks. So I know here in South Dakota, at least, we average about an inch of rain a week roughly in June, and so we can fall behind really quickly, as we've seen already in May and June of this year. Very few areas have had anything close to average rainfall in the Dakotas or Montana. Here's some statistics that I got from National Centers for Environmental Information, NCEI, from the Northern Rockies and Plains regions. So that includes Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, and Nebraska. And just to show you how dry it's been, just for the month of June, this 5-state region was the 8th driest on record, most similar to the years of 1936 and 1988. And I know I've heard a lot of comments of similarities between the current season and 1988 as far as dryness goes. Looking at May and June kind of together as a 2-month period, also it was 8th driest on record, driest since 2006. Which was really western Dakota's drought that I recall down in this area. And then looking at April through June, so since the start of the growing season, essentially, the last 3 months, 22nd driest on record, so not as extreme, but still the driest since 2006. So again, a very notable drought in this region. In addition to that, there are just a few numbers there. 6 Northeast Montana locations also had their driest June on record, and 12 of those locations had their driest April through June, driest 3-month period there on record as well. So really quite exceptional up in this part of the country. Looking at the temperature side of things, now looking at departure from average temperatures, again, just in the last 14 days since our last webinar on this topic, certainly cooler temperatures have dominated, especially the eastern Dakotas. As I mentioned, we had temperatures down in the 30s just a week and a half ago or so. So certainly was cooler than average, but we're on the uphill climb in much of the region, as we've been seeing temperatures in the 90s already here this week. And the forecast shows continued likely average temperatures to be warmer than average for the extended period of at least a couple weeks. So sure, it has been coolish in much of the region, but I think things will be turning around here in July towards the warmer side. Looking again just at this Northern Rockies and Plains region, again that 5-state area. On the temperature side for June, was the 25th warmest for that region. 2016 certainly was warmer just last year. Some years that were similar to June of 2017 were 1910 and 1970. Looking at the growing season so far since April, we're 26th warmest in this region. Last year was warmer, and some similar years there, 1926, 2001. February through June, I know it's kind of an odd period to pull up, but it was the 10th warmest on record. So if you remember, February was really warm, and maybe that was likely a precursor to the drought that we're experiencing now. But looking at February through June as a whole, 10th warmest on record. And 2012 and 2016 hold the record warmest for this region. 2012, as you recall, was a very significant drought year in this region. So those hold the records for sure. But being the top 10th percentile or 10th warmest on record, nothing to shake a stick at right there. Here's a picture on soil moisture. This is looking at a VIC, a hydrological model out of University of Washington, showing, just to give you one model output for soil moisture. We don't have a lot of soil moisture measurements across this region. North Dakota has a handful with their Mesonet, with their weather station network that are made public, but we don't have nearly as good measurements in other parts of the region. So we rely on models quite a bit to tell us the story on what's going on the ground. And certainly there's a bullseye there over western North Dakota of dry conditions. And this is percentile for this time of year, so compared to a pretty long period of record from 1916 to 2004, certainly is quite extreme, looking in the 5th percentile or worse for soil moisture. Another indicator that we look at in monitoring drought conditions is also stream flow, and use U.S. Geological Survey stream flow gauges to help us tell this story. And this is monthly average stream flow from June. Looking at those that are drier than average, you can see the legend there at the bottom with the different red and orange shadings and how extreme it is. So certainly western North Dakota has some of the lowest percentile or lowest stream flow on record up there, but really almost all the gauges in the region are below normal or a severe drought situation, according to the stream flow data. One other thing that we're keeping an eye on, not so much in a climate sense, but more in a weather sense, is keeping track of fire danger. Certainly we're heading into a weekend where temperatures are expected to be up over 100 in parts of the region. So this is one thing we look at, the South Dakota Grassland Fire Danger Index. This is published from the National Weather Service out of their Rapid City office. And this is the fire danger for tomorrow, for Saturday. Certainly Sunday, though, looks to be quite high danger as well, as we look at those high temperature, high wind, dry conditions. It was about this time last year where we saw quite a bit of fires started by farming equipment, haying equipment, that kind of thing. So as we get into that season, there's a lot of dry fuels out there, and I think that is something else that we should be prepared for across the region. Not just in South Dakota, but also looking here at North Dakota at the fire index, or their fire danger from their wildland fire assessment system, also showing at least moderate fire danger here. This is published this afternoon, earlier this afternoon. So certainly wildland fire is another hazard here in a drought situation. Looking ahead a little bit here, I've kind of alluded to the warm and dry conditions that we're expecting here in the next week or more. And this is one product from NOAA, their Weather Prediction Center, looking at 7-day total rainfall forecast. Anything in green there is less than ½ an inch of rain. So really minimal amounts expected over the next 7 days. Overall, pretty dry conditions given this time of year. Also, very likely warmer than average temperatures across the region as well, across the northern plains. Both of those factors will likely exacerbate or make worse the drought situation that we're in now. I believe kind of the next crop that I'm kind of worried about is corn, and I think Ryan will discuss the potential drought issues there as well in the agricultural sector here in a minute. Here's the 6 to 10 day outlook. This was from just yesterday afternoon, as today's hadn't yet been released when I put these slides together. But you see on the left there, very, very high probability of warmer than average temperatures to dominate over the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, in about a week's time or so from now. Looking at the right there, at the precipitation outlook for the 6 to 10 day period, also slightly leaning on the dry side, not as high likelihood, not as high probability, but does lean that way for the 6 to 10 day period, so about a week from now. One other thing I wanted to show along with this is the Climate Prediction Center also has a maximum heat index outlook as well. This is with that 6 to 10 day period, same time frame. So, you know, relatively good odds here of pretty high heat indices across the region with those extreme high temperatures as well. In the 8 to 14 day outlook here, we continue to see pretty high probability of warmer than average temperatures just holding tight over the region. And then that's on the left. And then on the right there again, still slightly leaning towards drier than average conditions in the 8 to 14 day period. So starting about a week from now, this is through next week. That would be this time frame. So it looks like we're in for an extended period of hot and dry, or warm and dry conditions, coming at a pretty tough time where you know, corn is usually starting to pollinate, at least down in South Dakota, around mid-July. So this could be a real tough time for these kinds of conditions to occur. On last Friday, this is looking at July overall. Last Friday, so this is about a week ago now, the Climate Prediction Center had released their 1 month outlook just for July, and they certainly picked up on those increased probabilities of warmer than average temperatures, especially in Montana and surrounding area. So that's consistent with the 1 and 2 week forecast that I just showed you a few slides ago. And along with that there on the right, again, slightly higher odds towards the drier conditions across the Dakotas and neighboring parts of Montana and Minnesota. So again, this is kind of the story. Hopefully you don't shoot the messenger here, and we're on the phone, so you can't throw any tomatoes at me up here. One other thing that was also released last Friday with that July outlook is the monthly drought outlook, showing, you know, in a brown area, persisting drought conditions. I don't think any of us here today would probably argue with that, given, you know, the monthly outlook I just showed. The yellow area shows likely drought development. Again, that'd be expanding across North Dakota and much of South Dakota. I might even argue that the southern part of South Dakota's area to keep an eye on as well. You know, they started out wet earlier in the spring, but they sure have turned towards the drier side here of late. So we'll be keeping an eye on all corners of the state here in South Dakota, and also working with partners in North Dakota and Montana as well. One last slide here, and I'll keep this up for a little bit so you guys can take a look or jot down any notes if you want to. learn some more information, SDSU Extension, that's South Dakota State University. We have a drought response team that's been generating some articles. We've had a couple producer ag drought meetings, and we'll be continuing those activities here going forward as long as the drought persists. So you can look us up there. Ryan Beto, the next presenter, is from NDSU, so I put up his extension link up there. We have a drought dashboard where you can kind of take a quick look at several maps and forecast information as they're updated on our drought dashboard. The U.S. Drought Portal covers national drought information, but also covers the Missouri Basin and the National Integrated Drought Information System, who's helping put on this webinar. National Weather Service and Climate Prediction Center, of course, are helping in the forecasting. High Plains Regional Climate Center. And then also there, Doug, is the link that you mentioned for the recording where this webinar will be found. Yeah, I believe I was told Monday or Tuesday next week, so it should be up soon after the weekend for you folks. With that, this is just my last slide of my contact information. You can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. And with that, Doug, I'll hand it off to you. If you want to do questions now or later, it's fine with me.
Thanks, Laura. That was very good. A couple of questions did come in. I think we're gonna hold off and get Ryan's talk in first, and I will try, as Ryan's going on there, I'll see if the Climate Prediction Center has updated any of those last few maps. Just for everybody's knowledge, some of those maps are updated on a daily basis, the short-term ones, but the longer ones, like the month outlooks, are done once or twice a month, and so it does take they're not readily available, or they're not new necessarily each day or even each week in some cases. All right, Ryan, are you ready to go if I get you the presentation? All right. Yep. All right, here we go.
All right.
There we go, I see it. Go ahead.
Good. All right, so I'm Ryan Beto. I'm an NDSU Area Extension Specialist in Cropping Systems, or Area Agronomist, if you want it. Might be a little easier to say. I'm kind of right in the middle of everything that's happening out here. In this picture here, you can see a typical cornfield out here. This is probably one of the nicer cornfields. It's fairly tall compared to a lot of the things out here. It's quite sad. Let's see here. Go to the next slide. All right. So I guess, I don't know if you can see my arrow or not, but I'm at the Dickinson Research Extension Center in the southwest corner here. And everything west of the Missouri River is kind of where I travel around quite a bit. And let's just say that that drought monitor is pretty accurate right now. It's, at least for out here, it's very dry. Look at the drought monitor on top of that. Typically in the past, I haven't been around here as long as others, but there's an old saying that, I mean, this area has always been 2 weeks away from a drought. Without the rain, that it just kind of turned into the perfect storm this spring. With even though we had quite a bit of moisture in the winter, we just didn't get any of that real rainfall when we needed it in the spring like we typically do. And then nothing else has really came after that. Well, I said I'm only really focused in the southwest part of the state here. I have heard a few reports of some of the conditions out by Montana and South Dakota. I've heard I got a friend up in northeastern Montana, and he had mentioned that there's some issues right now with the Lower Yellowstone irrigation project with the Army Corps of Engineers. On a year like this, they definitely are going to need as much help as they can get with irrigation up there. And even though they do irrigate their crops up in northeastern Montana there, the forage is just looking terrible. Pastures, just like out here where the pastures are looking brown and crunchy. Fire hazard, everyone's got it in their mind. Down towards South Dakota, I've heard some folks for those that have livestock, they had cover crops last year, and generally cover crops have worked, but this year it's kind of been a disaster where they ended up drying out the ground a bit more than they wanted it to, and not a whole lot of forage came out of that either. I think everyone's going to be hurting for forage this year, but my focus is kind of agronomy, so I know a bit more about that. But so weather conditions, Laura kind of mentioned it, very little rainfall. The rainfall that we did receive is very variable. You could be driving down the road and it would just be pounding rain, and you could just see on the other side of the road it's completely dry. I mean, you can be standing in one side of a road, you're getting drenched, and the other side is completely dry. Dickinson, since April 15th, around the time a lot of guys kind of started planting, some planted a bit earlier. Since that date, we've received about 3 inches of rain. I've heard of some farmers in one of the rain events that we've had have gotten 2 inches, so it's very variable in the amounts that we've gotten. And along with that very little rainfall, we've had heavy winds and extreme heat that have helped dry things out even worse. Not exactly a good scenario. So the crop conditions to go with that weather. So early planted crops, they're in the soil for a long time before receiving moisture. That contributed to some variability within those fields. There's a lot of fields where you can go out there and you can still see seeds sitting in the ground. Along with that, we had some frost events. This really hurt the guys with alfalfa. We got some frost early on. Then we got some insect issues that came along afterwards. The weevils destroyed what was left, and then everything else dried out. That happened in a few areas out here. But there's also some other more recent frost events. I'll show a picture here in a little bit. Some of the fields out here actually look surprisingly decent, but it's very variable. And even if some of the fields do look decent, those heads, like for wheat, for example, you walk out there, you start to notice it's very thin, very short, and even though it's green, those heads might not exactly fill very well, especially with the heat that we're getting. And the crops matured quite a bit faster than usual. Canola and flax that flowered a little early. Your wheat and other small grains were heading out quite a bit earlier. I was down by Hettinger yesterday, and John Rickardson, the research agronomist down there, he had said that his winter wheat might be ready by next week to harvest already. So it's quite a bit ahead of schedule. It's probably about 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Not exactly a good timing with this heat that we're getting. So this is one of the nicer fields that I've seen. You can see a little bit of variability out there. Definitely a thinner stand, but there's also Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, right? This was put in the NDSU Crop and Pest Report. Specialists from around the state will enter stuff in there. Greg Endres is from Carrington, just east of the Missouri out there, and this was by Zeeland, which is right along the South Dakota border. Some frost damage, and Laura had shown that frost damage earlier in the presentation. So along with the drought that we're facing, there's also frost that decided to come along, so whatever can go wrong will go wrong. This is some wireworm damage. A couple weeks ago, went down towards, would have been New England, North Dakota, and Hettinger County. And so they had wireworm issues. So this is kind of a lower spot in the field. And we dug around. There's a little bit more moisture right here. But, I mean, from just digging around, we found all kinds of wireworms. And the seed had been treated, but what they did is they went outside of the range of the treated seed and basically chewed around the stem, right around the crown of the plant, and really took it out. So there are some wireworm issues. There's pea leaf weevil that came in from Montana this year, right around the beach area, just east of Montana, and that's the first time I guess we've seen that in this state. What that does is it chews up the nodules of the pea plant so that the pea can't make its own nitrogen. This right here is fusarium. Looks like crown rot. So with this dry weather, you don't exactly think of diseases, but there are a few diseases, especially like root rots, that normally don't really cause too much of an effect, but with the stress added on from the drought, it becomes a lot more noticeable. Same thing with these insect issues. If it was a healthy crop, we might not even notice some of this stuff. But with how the stress that the plant's already under, things like fusarium root rot, common root rot, becomes a lot more noticeable in these conditions. All right. So it took me a while to find this, but I did find a soybean field out in the southwest part of North Dakota here. Very short. I did look at some soybeans in some of the research plots in Hettinger. We dug around. The nodules, there's not a whole lot of them. They're very small with how dry it is. I don't know if those nodules are going to be very active. So I don't know if the soybeans will be getting quite a bit of nitrogen from those bacteria. Not very tall. The ones that I know have been planted in that mid-May were about the same height as this at the research. So these are probably planted around the same time. Very short. I even saw a few flowers here and there already. So not exactly ideal conditions for soybeans. Last year, soybeans did okay out here, but there's a reason that this isn't exactly soybean country, but it's slowly working its way. But in a year like this, it's no good. Wheat, this is what everyone's kind of worrying about right now. Driving around yesterday, there were a lot of guys baling their wheat. It's probably worth more as hay these days than it is as grain, because I don't know how much they're going to fill out. I've even seen a few fields where the flag leaf up towards the top is already burnt out and it's trying to fill up. So without that energy from those leaves, the wheat heads won't exactly reach their full potential. And with this heat that we're receiving right now, there's a pretty wide range of maturities out here. And for some of those cereal crops that are still flowering, that heat is just gonna be disastrous on the yields. A lot of these guys just really want to zero it out with their insurance so that they can bale it while it's still worth something. But a lot of guys out here, from talking to them, have been dealing with some issues that they're trying to get figured out. But even these fields will look green, very short, and barely any tillers, very thin stands. Corn out here, this is that cornfield from my title slide. Pretty much all the corn out here is wilting, starting to curl up like you see here. It's tough. I mean, this is probably some of the tallest corn that I found driving around. I mean, most of it's probably half of this. You look along the hillsides, very bare, and staying up there. It's going to be tough. I know in drought conditions you can silage corn, but I don't even know if there's going to be enough corn to really silage even. If you don't get rain soon, this could be turning brown. You know, it's really tough. So a few weeks ago we had thought maybe the corn could pull through, but we had needed some rain, some decent rain for that to happen. And the way it's starting to look now, I don't know if that's going to be able to happen. And with the lack of forages like alfalfa, corn was going to probably be the next. I know for sure down in South Dakota that's a big feed for the cattle down there. If this corn goes as well as the other forages, we're losing a lot of. We're going to need something to feed that cattle with. So, along with the crop conditions, the soil conditions aren't exactly ideal either. You need to dig down quite a ways before you actually find moisture, at least 6 inches, and sometimes even deeper. This right here is a saline site. This area did receive a little bit of moisture, but when it gets dry like this, that salt just really accumulates at the top as that any water that was there just evaporates and brings the salts up with it. And as you can see here, nothing really grows except for weeds, and those weeds aren't really worth a whole lot for forage quality. There is some kochia in there if managed properly, can be a forage source, but you also need to watch out for nitrates, as with every other crop like your wheat when you're haying that. Lots of nitrate issues this year. I know that the North Dakota State University county agents are doing a great job at identifying nitrate issues. So some of the impacts, many small grain fields are being baled and some are even being grazed. But you need to make sure that you watch out for nitrates in those. From talking to consultants and salesmen, there's a huge reduction in fertilizer this year along with herbicide. Guys aren't applying those late season fertilizers because there's nothing really to apply them to. Guys aren't really spraying late because they're planning on just mowing it down and haying it. Ranchers are in dire need of forages. I was driving to Minnesota for the 4th of July weekend. I saw lots of hay moving west along 94. And also fresh water. With the lack of fresh water coming in, there's lots of issues with TDS and sulfates and nitrates. So people need to keep an eye out on their water. They need to haul water. It's nice that CRP is open, but that's not exactly ideal for grazing. Even though it's open for grazing, they still need to get fence and water out there. Along with that, many have sold off large portions of their herd because they just can't afford to feed them. So that's another huge impact out here. It's really hard to get the message across how dry it is just through pictures, but I mean, it's better than nothing. It's very dry out here. Looking forward, there are some crops that still look okay. Not great, but okay. The winter wheat crop, if they didn't hay it, I've seen some areas where they might get mid-30s for bushels per acre. But with the canola, it's not putting on a whole lot of pods. And I've seen peas and wheat that matured very early, very short, that didn't put on a whole lot. With the different soil types and rainfall amounts, some areas look better than others, and some planted earlier. So there's lots of factors that go into that. But if we don't receive rain soon, pretty much all optimism is gone. So this high heat in the forecast and the lack of moisture, it's not going to help with the yields. We're going to have huge yield losses. And if the corn doesn't start to turn around without silage, I have a feeling we're going to have a huge forage shortage. I guess that rhymes. But this is not a new issue for this region, but what makes this different than other droughts is we didn't receive any timely rains. We just haven't received anything really. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back over to Doug. And here's my contact information if you'd like to get a hold of me. I haven't used my Instagram for a while, but I need to get back on that, so you can follow this Instagram account to see some pictures of what it looks like out here. So thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. We have a number of questions, a lot of them really good ones. I think we're going to have to start from the top in terms of questions. And some of these are comments rather than questions. I won't go through them all, but I'll more or less paraphrase or whatever. But if I get it wrong, raise your hand again, and I'll just have you do the talking. One question for Michael Sweet out in Montana, and this one we may want to bring in a specialist to answer this question, but what is the difference about the climatic patterns that precipitated this drought? That is, what is different in that got us into this than what has happened in the past, I guess. Obviously there's low precipitation, but Montana has experienced also a lot of wind. And this drought seemed to arrive fairly quickly. And I guess Laura will hit you up with that one first. But and 2 weeks ago we had a similar webinar like this, and we were trying to explain how this drought came to be and how it hit us so fast, and how, if you will, how sort of unprepared some of the folks were, including us, in terms of recognizing it and all that kind of thing. And I think you hinted at it in terms of the warm temperatures, not only this spring, but last fall, maybe draining some of that soil moisture, deep soil moisture out, and things like that. And the fact that it got so hot so fast. The wind, I don't have a good answer for about why it would be any stronger than normal. It's usually a little windy up there anyway, but apparently it's been a lot windier than normal. Laura, do you have any other comments along those lines?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot, and I don't know that I have a single great answer for that. But like you said, Doug, I think the really late fall we had, especially the winter wheat, those kinds of crops, had some kind of bonus time growing in the fall and depleted some of that soil moisture. Some of this D2, D3 area had really good snowfall, but I think it melted too early, especially with that really warm February. Our snowpack went away relatively quickly and early, so we weren't able to use that to replenish too much of the soil moisture here in the spring. And yeah, just the up and down temperatures, I think, kind of maybe got things going a little earlier than we thought. Yeah, and the wind, I hear that comment a lot this year, Mike, from all over the region. And I don't know that we've gotten all together to get some climatology together about that, but that is certainly something we should look into as well.
Yeah. Okay, and then one question from, let's see. Okay, this is another question for you, Laura. You've been at some producer meetings lately. Actually, probably you and Ryan have been. And they'd like to hear some of the comments you've heard out of those meetings in terms of how worried people are and what kind of things are they doing to deal with the situation, to let's say, mitigate some of the damage that they're having to deal with.
Sure, I can take a first stab, and I know Ryan has had producer meetings as well. So just yesterday, we were up in Harriet and Gettysburg in north central part of South Dakota, and already there's been, culling cows, selling early. I think early weaning is another thing they're greatly considering. There's a lot of interest in CRP for the grazing and haying as well that they want to see opened up. I think, yeah, and as Ryan mentioned too, forages and water are a big concern as well, as the stock ponds are getting low, and we had several people bring in water for testing for water quality as well. So I think those are probably the top things that I've seen.
And Ryan, do you have any comments?
It's about the same. This guy is trying to make sure that they can make sure a lot of these models are as accurate as possible. There's been some issues trying to get payments and that kind of stuff. But yeah, just I don't know if everyone is exactly dealing with it in the best form, but there are some lots of different issues out there that this has caused. But
okay,
about the same as what Laura said.
The next question I haven't heard anything about, so I'm hoping one of you two has, and it concerns West Nile virus and whether that's an issue or less of an issue, more or less of an issue this year.
I heard something on the radio today. It's not exactly the best source, but yeah, it's still an issue, even though the numbers are down. The West Nile, it's still something to be worried about. I don't know, Florida, if you got more than that.
Yeah, I think the first West Nile case this year in a human in South Dakota was 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago. Last week in South Dakota, they had their first meeting about it for this season. So I haven't heard what their forecast is, but certainly it's more of an issue in drought years like this one. So typically the species of mosquito that carries that typically becomes more of an issue in July, later July or August. But I know South Dakota is keeping an eye on it for sure, since we have some of the highest per capita counties that usually carry that. Yeah, so it's something to stay tuned on, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, Dennis Toddy makes a comment that the mosquitoes that carry that particular virus aren't really impacted by rainfall, like many other mosquitoes that we all love so well are, which is interesting in and of itself. I guess that's the reason it's from the drier areas of the earth. Okay. Another question was there have been some extensive cattle sales across those three states. Because do you have any comments about if that has slowed down or producers still continuing to do so? Any feel for that? I guess that'd be you, Ryan. Guys still selling their cattle? You're on mute.
As far as I know, they're still selling them, but I don't think it's as often as it was before. But
yep.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know they're still
okay.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, I think down in South Dakota too. Yeah, we kind of saw that big flush, a few weeks ago, a month ago. They might just be in a holding pattern, kind of in between, seeing what corn and feed, what other food options they might have, coming up here in the midsummer.
Okay. Then another question from media is how will the drought, as far as you guys know, how will the drought affect prices of wheat for things like bread and things like that, or is that a question that you guys can answer?
Well, the wheat market. Yeah, go ahead.
Laura, you got it.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say the wheat market is rising, but then it took a drop here. So I don't know how much that will get passed on to the consumer. But, yeah, there was some gradual increase the last week and a half in wheat until just a couple days ago.
I think as this drought monitor expand most likely, I'm not sure on that, but if this drought kind of expands out to other areas and gets worse, especially with this heat we're getting, I mean, you shorten the supply and demand stays the same, price is going to change, but there are other areas that grow wheat. So.
Yeah, and a lot of that wheat's been harvested, hasn't it, Laura and Ryan, further south already?
Should have been.
Yeah, there's a lot of winter wheat further south, so I'd say the drought in our region is affecting more spring wheat. It did winter wheat as well, but there's a larger wheat growing region too. Yeah.
Right. So I just want to get into this a little bit more before we get down to some of the other questions. There's a few more questions to go through here. So the message, Laura, that you pretty much put out there for the foreseeable, which means for us maybe 2 to 4 weeks out, is for continued hotter than normal temperatures, most likely, and below normal precipitation over this same region, most likely. Almost on top of that whole hot and dry part, almost right on top of the already stricken area. I just want to say that again in terms of so people understand that it's already serious, but as you heard in Ryan's voice and maybe Laura's a little bit too, it's not looking good for other crops in terms of impacts as well. I suppose if I don't know if Ryan, you talked a little bit about irrigation, and Laura, is irrigation able to keep up with these conditions?
Everything's dry land by where I'm at, pretty much. But if you go north of here, they're irrigating. And I heard a story, a guy, he does, I think it's pipe irrigation, where they kind of flooded a little bit. He said within 8 hours, everything was gone already. So it soaked in pretty quick.
Okay. So, all right. And then
another question. Montana.
Northeast Montana, okay. And what are the prospects? Here's another question. What are the prospects for Yankton, South Dakota? Laura, this is you. And Northeast Nebraska. Conditions haven't been as severe there yet, but they seem to be worsening. And there are some indications that moderate drought may be following if we don't get another inch or two of rain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I can't see who asked that question, but I think I know who it is. Yeah, well, they did get a couple, rain events go through there this season, and they started out wet, so that kind of skewed maybe the earlier season data, but yeah, I'm hearing more reports now from south central, southeastern part of the state where things are heating up and drying out. So that is an area certainly we'll be keeping an eye on here in the coming weeks for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And just a comment out of northeast Montana, there hasn't been, as far as we know, no major reports of West Nile in that area. Okay, here's the ultimate question. Thanks, Bryce Anderson. He hates to ask this, but he's going to ask it anyway. Is there a chance that this becomes a multi-year event, similar to Texas and/or California? I know that's a tough one, and you guys can speculate all you want, but I'm not sure anybody has the answer to that. We certainly don't want to see that. Is there a potential? Sure, but at this point there'd be nothing we could base that on other than past history, saying yes, long-term droughts have occurred, and certainly over this region, as well as the Great Plains, we know that well. Anything you guys want to say along those lines?
Yeah, this is Laura. I could take a stab at that first. Yeah, looking forward, from here forward, I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't say it going forward that we can be sure this would be a multi-year drought. Even looking after 2012, there's pretty rapid, good recovery, into the 2013 growing season. So, that's one example where we had D4 and then it went away. Although I might argue, some people would argue that the current drought we're seeing might be the second year of drought. Looking at northwestern South Dakota, they were in drought last year this time. The drought monitor did show improvement over the winter season, but from what I hear of, especially livestock water issues, some of those were likely carryover issues from the dry season last year. Speaking of the irrigation question, I just heard yesterday some junior water rights holders in the upper Big Sioux watershed. So that's along South Dakota-Minnesota border, upriver of Sioux Falls. And those junior water rights holders just got cutoff orders, from what I understand. And that's an area not even shown in drought right now on the drought monitor. And that's a carryover issue from the dry fall, winter, last year even. So, it could be argued we're already in a multi-year drought now in year 2.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just checking to see if the new outlooks have come in. They have not. Looking on the CPC side. Yeah, and the other thing I'd say, Bryce, if you're still listening, in terms of trends in precipitation, generally, the Dakotas, especially east of the river, if you will, have seen an increase in precipitation over time, certainly since the 50s and maybe even before that, generally speaking. We have these odd years in the 2012 and 88 and things like that, but if you look at a trend over a long period of time, precipitation totals for a year, which doesn't do you a lot of good right now, I understand, have generally increased. West of the river, it's a little less obvious that those increases have occurred. So, all right. Anybody want to say anything more about fire, major fires or anything like that? Someone wrote in about a fire in Montana near the Fort Belknap reservation. So, just wondering if anybody wants to make any comments. I don't know if we've seen any huge areas yet of impact, or certainly I just read something, I guess, from Dave Martin from the Bureau of Indian Affairs saying or was it Darren Clabo says we're very ripe for those conditions to occur. We had a discussion earlier today with with some folks that look at the southwest, well, they look at the whole nation, but the southwest part of the U.S. with a quote-unquote monsoon forms about this time of year. Some of that moisture sometimes trickles up to this area. It's relatively, well, it's not a lot of precipitation that makes it that far, but it's enough to cause thunderstorms. And often, and I think people have already seen this, is you get a number of thunderstorms, and what you call dry thunderstorms with a lot of lightning, which doesn't do a lot of good for anybody except well, whoever likes fires, I guess. So any comments on that, or what you've seen so far in terms of fire startings and such?
I can make a comment from South Dakota. So I know there's some big fires going out in Wyoming now, out towards Laramie area. That's where a lot of our state wildland fire people are actually now this week. But it was last year this time that we started to see a real rapid increase in fire activity. More of that last year was due to harvesting, baling, kind of agriculture activity. So we'll see how that unfolds this year. A lot of the wheat has already been cut and baled, as Ryan mentioned. So, but if CRP opens up for haying and other things like that, I think it'd be more, human starts just as much as dry lightning starts in the next coming weeks here.
Okay. And there have been a few baler fires up here. I don't think anything too extreme, but they're still going out there right now baling. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out for.
Yep. And a couple of people have written in that depending on where you are, no major fires, I guess, yet in at least on BIA or sort of reservation lands. Montana volunteers are on guard, ready to respond. In other words, everybody's pretty twitchy about fires because they know how dry it is and how wet it has been. That's one of the things. If you've been wet for a few years, you get a lot more fuel built up. So there is some concern. I think we mentioned this earlier when CRP opens up. That there'll be more fires occurring. Hey, would one of you guys just go through that again? Why would the opening up of CRP lands and those are and just describe why that's an issue?
Yeah, I guess I'm the one who mentioned that. So CRP Conservation Reserve Program, so that's with USDA on lands that are kept out of ag production, so to speak. And so a lot of those lands are not as good, so they might have a lot of rocks in them or other things. So when you bring equipment through, could set a spark as one example to start a fire, relatively quickly. So that's partly why I mentioned the CRP when and if that's open up for haying. I understand July 16th it will be open in Montana for haying activities. It's already open for grazing in all of our 3 states. But the haying isn't open yet in the Dakotas as far as I know.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments from y'all? I did throw up this, I threw up the latest, I think they just came out today, what they call divisional precipitation ranks. And you can see, can everybody see my screen there?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can see it? Okay. You can look at Montana. It's the driest it's ever been in terms of that area of Montana from that April to June period. That's in the upper left-hand corner. And you can see, generally dry areas around that as well. And if you look at the rankings, the lower right corner, you see that North Dakota came in 7th overall in terms of that same period, in terms of dryness. The 7th driest year, and then South Dakota not far behind at 20th, and Montana at 27th. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure you all saw that. And again, I didn't get any updates. I don't know if there's anybody else who has anything else they want to say. Feel free to raise your hand. I did get, let's see, there's a Julie Cromlich. Do you have a comment? I will unmute you if you do. I don't see a question. There you go, Julie. You're live if you want to be, or not. Anybody else have anything they want to say? Feel free to raise your hand, and I certainly can call on you. Bryce, Bryce, do you got a question or a comment?
Yes, I have a comment, Doug. The 6 to 10 day forecast did come out, and it's got above normal all the way from the West Coast basically to Lake Erie for the next 6 to 10 days, and then precip is pretty much below normal throughout the plains and the western corn belt. So,
okay, let me refresh here and see if I can find that. I for some reason I'm not refreshing very well on that. So yeah. Anyway, that's the latest I've got. Right there.
Yeah, but it's keeping things pretty much warm and dry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no major changes. So
no big change.
Okay. Appreciate that. Looking through just to see if there's anybody else has a final comment. Again, I don't see anybody there. All right. So I think at this point, I think we'll call it a day. Let me just say, in 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks, on July 20th, we'll be having another webinar. It'll be a broader regional webinar covering a larger area, but a lot of focus will be on this area, assuming, and with the high probabilities of drought continuing, will be focused on this area in terms of impacts and outlooks, whereas the rest of the Midwest and north central part of the U.S. has been at least wet enough to keep crops pretty happy in terms of agriculture, and everybody else in terms of water resources. So that will be at 1 p.m. Thursday, July 20th. And if you're unable to, if you have never seen the link to that, I probably ought to put it in the comment section here and send it to you all. If you stay on long enough, I'll find it for you. We can hopefully go to a couple different places, and I'll show you the link. Many of you are already on that, or already get that information. I think it's our regular monthly webinar that we do, and there'll be a
Doug,
couple. Can you put it up or something?
I couldn't put it up, but just want to mention the Michigan state climatologist Jeff Andreessen, and also North Dakota state climatologist Adnan Akuz will be the presenters in 2 weeks. And that does coincide with the release of the Outlook update from Climate Prediction Center for August and the season ahead. So it'll be good information to keep tabs on the situation.
Yep. And I just about have it here. Okay. I'm going to put it on I'll just put it on the PowerPoint I have up here. How's that? Everybody see what I'm doing there? Did that come up in front of everyone?
Yep, we see it, Doug.
Okay, so there's the link if you want to get on that webinar and any subsequent monthly webinar that we hold on a regular basis for the north central part of the U.S. Feel free to register for that. We will look at the conditions after this date on July 20th and see if we need another, if you will, special webinar focused on the north central part of, northern plains, and get that information out to you as well. So thank you very much. If you ever want to, you can always write me at doug.cluck@noaa.gov if you think you're missing out on anything, and I can put you on lists to receive this type of information. So I'm going to say thank you again to Laura and Ryan. We've got a lot of information out there. Hopefully it's useful to you. Again, this comes from you from a partnership between NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Center for Environmental Information, Weather Service is a big part of this, National Weather Service, and state climatologists, the Association of State Climatologists, and Extension, in both in South and North Dakota. So thank you all, and we will talk to you again, I hope, in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.